How you doing? Welcome to another episode of I'm Tired of Church. You know what? I realize a lot of times people don't like the word grace. They always want to attach something to it. Cheap grace. No, grace is not that great. And sometimes grace is a learning process. You're continuing to learn. They say we're saved by grace, but then they say you have to do all this stuff on top of that. So are we saved by grace or not? You know. So here's the key thing about grace. Grace meets you where you are at. See, it meets you where you're at. It doesn't say get over here, do all this, and now you get grace. Grace meets you exactly where you are at. The religious system tells you, no, where you're at is not good enough. You have to do this. You have to be more godly. You have to be more like Christ. You know what happens when you try to be more godly? You're going to fail. Look what happened to Eve. The serpent said, if you eat of that tree, you be more like God. And what you do? Well, we know what happens. Just look around. Because she tried to be more godly. She didn't realize she was perfectly made. She could have told the serpent right there, why would I want to be more like God? I'm perfectly made in His image. Nope. But she wanted to be more godly. And this is what happens these days with the religious system. You need to be more godly. You need to be more like Christ. You need to be careful with that, because what happens is you're going to put this burden on your shoulders. And then just like Eve, they realized later on, oh crap, we're naked. Hello, you've always been naked. But now that they're laboring for their spiritual life and trying to be more spiritual, now they realize, man, we're just not good enough. Let's cover ourselves. This is a shame. And what happens is with the religious system is no different. They give you this burden and say you have to do all this. And before you know it, at the end, you look back and you say you haven't went nowhere. You haven't moved an inch. Because you're trying to get to where grace is at, but you fail to realize grace meets you where you're at. Let's look at the prodigal son. When he was coming back, the dad didn't just wait at home and say, come on, hurry up, get here, I'm tired. Oh, now that you're here, now what are you going to do? Okay, son, you need to confess. Get on your knees. Kiss my feet. Okay, now get out there and work with the slaves. After a month, then you come into the house. And no. And if the father would have done that, we would have been like, well, that's he should have done that. But no. Why? Because the father's grace is bigger than that. The father met him while the kid was coming. And this is how God's grace works. And then what happens? He meets him out there, and the kid says, Dad, I sinned against you and I sinned against heaven. Make me as one of your hired servants. The father didn't even address that. I imagine he was probably like, what are you talking about? Shut up. Hey, party time, baby. And he threw a party. He didn't even address what the kid was talking about. Why? Because God's grace forgets all that. God's grace is bigger than just your labors and what you have done wrong and right. God's grace meets you where you're at, just the way God's grace met him. The prodigal son met him where he was at, went out there and said, come on, party time. He didn't make him do all these extra things, although he could have, and it would have been justified. Okay? And then the other son, the good son, was upset because, hey, he didn't understand God's grace. Hey, Dad, how come you didn't throw me nothing? I was always here. I'm the good boy. And what did Dad tell him? Hey, you've always been here. What you have, this is all yours. And the son, the good son, didn't even understand that. He didn't have to go out there and work like he was doing in the field. He probably thought he had to labor to get that. He didn't understand God's grace either. He didn't realize this is all mine. This is perfect. Yes, God's grace is like that. It meets you where you're at. It's all yours. You're perfectly made where you're at. There's no need to carry on this spiritual burden and this religious burden to try to get better, to try to get more spiritual, more holy, to try to be something that you're not. God made you as you are. There's no need for you to carry on this spiritual burden that the religious system wants to put on you. Because they'll give a quick list. You need to read the Bible more. Okay, then how much is more? 10 minutes a day? 10 hours a day? There's no such thing in the Bible like that. Hell, the Old Testament people didn't, in the beginning of the New Testament, Christians didn't even have a Bible. So you can't tell me I need to read the Bible to get closer to God. No. How did they do it? They did it by loving each other and understanding God's grace, not just for them, but for others. That's how they did it. They didn't all have a Bible and say this, let's all get Bible study. No, they didn't have that. Some of them couldn't even read. But they understood God's grace. Because that's all Paul spoke about. God's love and peace and God's grace. That is intertwined in all his letters. Grace meets you where you're at, and where you're at is exactly where you need to be. No need to search for God's will. You watch my other video I put out there, I'll show you how to find God's perfect will in your life. Alright, but grace meets you where you're at, brother. Sister, you're perfectly made as you are. Perfectly made. No need to add to that. Don't be like Eve. To say, oh, I'm going to listen to that voice that says I'm not perfect. You're perfectly made as you are. Learn to live in God's grace. Don't ever forget that what Jesus Christ did is enough.